Maple Creek, Ohio, nestled deep in the heartland, was the kind of town that tourists might describe as charming. Its main street boasted a single traffic light, a weathered general store that smelled of cinnamon and old wood, and a church steeple that pointed resolutely towards a perpetually indifferent sky. Outwardly, it projected an idyllic, pastoral serenity, a postcard image of Americana. Yet, beneath this placid veneer, a different truth murmured. Maple Creek wasn't just quiet, it was stagnant. Opportunities were as scarce as a fresh snowfall in July, and for those who couldn't find their footing, the pervasive sense of small-town gossip and ingrained judgment could feel like a smothering blanket. Here, complacent comfort existed for some, but for others, a quiet desperation hummed beneath the surface, a constant reminder of dreams deferred. Arthur Hayes lived in one such dream-deferred existence, in a modest, slightly run-down house on Elm Street, its peeling paint and overgrown porch a silent testament to humble circumstances and quiet resignation. Arthur Hayes, at 28, was a gentle, unassuming man, easily overlooked in a crowd. He possessed the quiet, almost invisible presence of someone accustomed to blending into the background. His days were a monotonous blur spent at the local lumber mill, the rhythmic whine of saw blades and the constant scent of sawdust marking the passage of time. It was a dead-end job, physically demanding and intellectually unstimulating, a routine that left him drained but rarely fulfilled. His true self, however, emerged in the quiet solitude of his small, cluttered garage. There, amidst forgotten tools and boxes of salvaged components, lay his secret passion tinkering with old radios and electronics. His hands, calloused from millwork, moved with a surprising delicacy as he coaxed life back into ancient vacuum tubes or meticulously soldered intricate circuits. This wasn't just a hobby. It was a testament to a methodical mind, an innate attention to detail, and a patience that few people ever saw. He could dissect a complex schematic, trace a faulty wire, and diagnose an obscure malfunction with uncanny precision. Yet, this rare talent, this quiet spark of genius, remained entirely unacknowledged by anyone outside his four garage walls. His aspiration was simple, almost painfully so, to save enough money to open a small electronics repair shop in town. It was a modest dream. Yet in Maple Creek, it felt impossibly distant, a shimmering mirage on his own personal horizon. Arthur, by nature, avoided conflict and confrontation, preferring the predictable hum of a working circuit board to the unpredictable chaos of human interaction. He was fundamentally good-hearted, a decent man, but he sorely lacked self-confidence and knowledge of the world beyond the familiar, confining borders of Maple Creek. One biting November afternoon, with the promise of early snow dusting the rooftops, Arthur found himself on a rare errand to the general store. As he left, clutching a small bag of groceries, he noticed an elderly woman, Mrs. Gable, struggling with a flat tire on her ancient Ford sedan. She was a kindly soul, her face etched with the wisdom of 80 years, and a regular customer at the mill. Most folks simply drove past, either too busy or too indifferent. Arthur, despite the biting cold seeping into his threadbare jacket and the fatigue in his bones from a long shift, didn't hesitate. He simply placed his groceries on the curb, walked over, and without a word, set about changing her tire. His movements were efficient, practiced, and he worked with a quiet determination that spoke volumes. He didn't ask for payment, didn't wait for praise. When he was done, he simply wiped his hands on a rag, offered Mrs. Gable a small, polite smile, and went on his way, leaving her to marvel at his unexpected kindness. This quiet act of selflessness, this simple demonstration of his inherent decency, was Arthur's save the cat moment, solidifying the reader's immediate empathy and ensuring that when his world inevitably darkened, he would be a figure worth rooting for. Meanwhile, at the county courthouse, the wheels of a very different machine were turning. District Attorney Wallace Finch was a rising star in the legal firmament. A man whose ambition was as meticulously tailored as his suits. In his mid-30s, with a perfectly coiffed head of dark hair and a smile that could disarm juries, Finch was known throughout the county for his aggressive prosecution tactics and an almost unblemished record of high conviction rates. He cultivated an image of ruthless efficiency and unwavering dedication to justice, but beneath the polished exterior, he was driven solely by personal advancement. Cases, to Finch, were not about truth or justice. They were stepping stones, notches on his belt, data points for his next promotion or, perhaps, a future run for higher office. In a recent interview for the Maple Creek Gazette, a puff piece designed to bolster his public image, Finch had offered a brief, dismissive comment that resonated with his underlying philosophy. "My job," he had declared, leaning back in his leather chair with an air of practiced authority, "is to clean up the streets, to ensure law and order. And frankly, that sometimes means dealing with the small-town scum, the petty criminals who think they can get away with anything. We won't tolerate it. We're sending a clear message." He had vaguely referenced minor offenders, almost as an afterthought, but the words carried a chilling undertone of an uncaring, efficiency-driven justice system. It was a subtle but potent foreshadowing of his role as the antagonist type A, the scheming, greedy opponent. A man whose ambition would blind him to nuance and, ultimately, to innocence. Finch was focused on optics, on statistics, on a narrative of success that left little room for inconvenient truths or the lives of the unseen men like Arthur Hayes. His world, clean and ordered, was about to collide with Arthur's, messy and unpredictable, setting the stage for a conflict that would reveal the true nature of both men. The seemingly mundane Friday afternoon in Maple Creek began like any other, but for Arthur Hayes, it was about to unravel into a nightmare. His shift at the lumber mill had just ended, the drone of saws finally silenced, leaving a ringing emptiness in his ears. He was heading home, planning to spend the evening lost in the comforting intricacies of an old tube radio he was meticulously restoring. As he walked past antiques and oddities, a dusty, cluttered shop near the town square, he paused. He often rummaged through the discarded items outside, hoping to find stray parts or unique pieces that might spark an idea for a repair. Today, his eyes fell upon a peculiar, ornate brass dial discarded amongst a pile of broken furniture. It looked like it belonged to an antique radio receiver, a rare pre-war model. He knelt, examining it closely, his fingers tracing its delicate engravings. He considered asking the shop owner, Mr. Abernathy, if he could take it, but the shop was closed, a "Be back soon" sign hanging crookedly on the door. Thinking it was clearly trash, Arthur carefully picked up the dial, intending to clean it up later and see if it could be repurposed. This trivial incident, born of his innocent fascination, would become the fulcrum of his undoing, the crime that wasn't a crime, yet would fundamentally alter the course of his life. He was barely a block from his house when the flashing lights of a Maple Creek police cruiser cut through the twilight. The car screeched to a halt beside him. Before Arthur could even register what was happening, two uniformed officers, their faces grim, were out of the vehicle. "Arthur Hayes, you're under arrest," one of them stated, his voice devoid of warmth. Arthur, bewildered, stammered, "Arrest for what?" The officer gestured vaguely at the brass dial clutched in Arthur's hand. "Theft. Mr. Abernathy reported a stolen antique radio component." Arthur's mind reeled. He tried to explain, "But it was outside. Discarded. I was just going to ask Mr. Abernathy about it tomorrow." His words, however, sounded hollow, desperate, even to his own ears. The officers, overworked and perhaps complacent in a town where major crime was rare, quickly dismissed his bewildered explanations. They saw only the circumstantial evidence of reported theft. A man found with the item. At the Maple Creek Police Department, the fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sterile, unforgiving glow on the interrogation room. Detective Harding, a burly man whose face rarely betrayed emotion, sat across from Arthur. Harding was by the book, a veteran who valued efficiency over nuance. He saw only the neat package of circumstantial evidence, Mr. Abernathy's frantic report, the missing antique dial, and Arthur's nervous, stammering answers. The interrogation was less about finding the truth and more about getting a quick, clean confession. "Look, Mr. Hayes," Harding said, his voice flat. "We've got the item. We've got the witness. Just tell us what happened. Make it easy on yourself." Arthur, naive and terrified, unwittingly dug his own grave with every attempt to clarify. "I didn't steal it. I just picked it up. I meant to ask if it was trash, if I could keep it for parts for my radios." His passion for electronics, usually a source of quiet joy, now sounded like a flimsy excuse. His easily misinterpreted answers, coupled with his visible distress, only solidified Harding's conviction that he was dealing with a clear-cut case. Arthur's profound lack of legal experience made him utterly vulnerable, a lamb led to slaughter by his own honesty. The crushing reality of his situation truly hit when he met his public defender, a perpetually overwhelmed and cynical attorney named Mr. Henderson. Henderson's office was a cluttered mess, overflowing with files, a mirror of his perpetually overloaded caseload. He barely looked up as Arthur explained, haltingly, what had happened. "Look, Mr. Hayes," Henderson said, his voice flat, devoid of any genuine interest or empathy. "It's a minor theft, but the D.A. has a good record. Wallace Finch doesn't lose. A guilty plea, time served, maybe some probation, a small fine. That's your best bet. Fight it, and you're looking at real jail time. Finch will make an example out of you." Arthur's stomach churned. Jail. The word itself was a cold, alien concept, utterly foreign to his quiet, unassuming life. He was terrified, a profound fear he had never known. But beneath the terror, a flicker of something new ignited within him, a stubborn, righteous indignation. He hadn't stolen anything. He couldn't lie. Not to himself. Not to a court. His inherent honesty, a core tenet of his character, made him reject the plea bargain. "I can't," Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly but firm. "I'm innocent. I have to fight it." This was his initial moment of defiance, a quiet spark against the overwhelming darkness. He believed that justice, simple and pure, would prevail. The trial was a swift, perfunctory affair, little more than a formality in the eyes of the prosecution. District Attorney Wallace Finch was a master of his craft, presenting the circumstantial evidence with ruthless efficiency. He painted Arthur as a petty opportunist, a man who saw something valuable and simply took it, fabricating a flimsy excuse when caught. Finch's closing argument was a powerful, eloquent condemnation, devoid of any actual malice towards Arthur, but full of the chilling indifference of a man whose primary goal was conviction rates. He called Arthur's explanation a fanciful tale, and scoffed at the idea that anyone would simply pick up a discarded item of inherent value without larcenous intent. The judge, a stoic, weary man who had seen countless such minor cases, listened dispassionately. The jury, mostly small-town folk, swayed by Finch's polished presentation and the seeming simplicity of the facts, deliberated for less than an hour. The bailiff's voice boomed through the courtroom. "Guilty." The word echoed in Arthur's ears, each syllable a hammer blow. He stared, numb, as the judge pronounced his sentence 6 months in Northwood State Penitentiary, followed by a year of probation. 6 months, for a discarded brass dial. His dreams of the electronics repair shop, his quiet life, everything he had meticulously built, crumbled around him. The gavel fell, a resounding crack that sealed his fate. The harsh, metallic clang of the cell door, swinging shut behind him at Northwood State just hours later, was the final, brutal punctuation mark on his former existence. His world, his small aspirations, were shattered, He was trapped, unjustly, in a system he now understood was cruelly indifferent, a vast, impersonal machine that ground up the innocent and the naive with the same cold efficiency as the guilty. This was the point of no return. The path to his past life was irrevocably closed, and a new, terrifying, and utterly unexpected journey had begun. The initial days within the stark, concrete confines of Northwood State Penitentiary were a brutal, disorienting shock for Arthur Hayes. The cold reality of iron bars and echoing hallways replaced the familiar hum of his lumber mill. The stale air thick with the scent of disinfectant, stale food, and the unspoken anxieties of hundreds of confined men. The constant noise, a cacophony of shouts, clanging metal, and distant, unsettling murmurs, assaulted his senses, leaving him perpetually on edge. Privacy was a forgotten luxury, replaced by the invasive glare of fluorescent lights and the unblinking gaze of surveillance cameras. He witnessed firsthand the casual, almost routine injustices that permeated the system, arbitrary punishments, delayed medical attention, and the chilling, ingrained violence that simmered just beneath the surface of enforced order. Each day was a stark reminder of his shattered dreams, his quiet aspirations for an electronics shop reduced to a cruel mockery. A profound depression settled over him, heavy and suffocating, threatening to consume the very essence of who he was. In his despair, Arthur found himself gravitating towards the most unlikely of sanctuaries within the prison walls, the law library. It was a small, often overlooked room, tucked away in a quiet corner of the general population block. The air there was thick with the scent of aged paper and dust, illuminated by a single, flickering fluorescent light that cast long, dancing shadows across shelves crammed with outdated legal texts. Most inmates avoided it, seeing it as a grim reminder of their failed appeals or a futile exercise in hope. But for Arthur, it offered a different kind of escape. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Perhaps just a distraction from his crushing reality, a place where his methodical mind could latch onto something, anything, other than the relentless despair. It was in this dusty realm that he encountered Old Man Rivers. Rivers was a grizzled, enigmatic inmate, his face a roadmap of hard living and enduring resilience, his eyes sharp and surprisingly lucid for a man who had spent decades behind bars. He was serving a life sentence for a crime he steadfastly, almost religiously, claimed he didn't commit. Rivers, a self-taught legal scholar of astonishing depth, spent his days poring over case law, cross-referencing statutes, and meticulously annotating legal precedents. He was a walking encyclopedia of the justice system's intricacies, its flaws, and its occasional, fleeting triumphs. He initially regarded Arthur with a wary, appraising gaze, seeing just another fresh fish drowning in self-pity. But as he observed Arthur's quiet, persistent presence in the library, his meticulous note-taking, and the almost desperate hunger in his eyes, Rivers saw something else. He saw a meticulousness, a quiet, analytical mind akin to his own, and a desperate, raw hunger for justice. Slowly, tentatively, Rivers became Arthur's reluctant mentor, a gruff oracle whispering ancient legal wisdom. "You ain't just reading words, kid," Rivers rasped one afternoon, his voice like gravel. "You gotta feel the bones of the argument, see the rot where it starts." Arthur, under Rivers' strict but invaluable guidance, began to absorb the complexities of the law. His mind, accustomed to the precise logic of electronic circuits, found a strange, compelling parallel in the intricate web of legal statutes and precedents. He devoured texts, his focus absolute, often forgetting the oppressive reality of his surroundings. His first true test, his unveiling, came not from his own case, but from a small, seemingly insignificant plea from a fellow inmate named Marcus. Marcus had been unfairly thrown into solitary confinement for a minor infraction, his favorite, deeply sentimental family photograph confiscated by a zealous guard. It was a petty injustice, but one that gnawed at Marcus's spirit. "It ain't right, man," Marcus whispered to Arthur during yard time, his voice laced with despair. "They just took it. Said it was contraband. My kid's face, man." Arthur, emboldened by Rivers's quiet encouragement, felt a familiar spark of righteous indignation ignite within him, a flicker of the honesty that had refused the plea bargain. This was an injustice he could fight. He immersed himself in the prison's disciplinary regulations, in the obscure precedents Rivers pointed him towards. He meticulously researched, drafting a simple, yet surprisingly effective appeal. He articulated Marcus's rights, cited the specific regulations the guard had violated, and even unearthed a forgotten prison policy on personal effects. The appeal wasn't for a judge, but for a 3-person prison disciplinary board, 2 guards and a junior administrator. Arthur was nervous, his palms sweating. But as he stood before the board, his voice, though still quiet, resonated with an astonishing clarity. He presented his arguments, quoting regulations and citing precedents he'd only just learned with the precision of a seasoned attorney. He argued not with emotion, but with cold, unassailable logic. He pointed out the discrepancies in the guard's report, the arbitrary nature of the confiscation, the lack of due process. The board, accustomed to inmates shouting or cowering, listened with growing surprise. Arthur, the unseen man, was astonishingly effective. He won the case. It was a minor victory. Marcus's solitary confinement was shortened, and his photograph was returned. But for Arthur, and for the handful of inmates who had watched in stunned silence, it was monumental. It was a revelation. It proved, to himself and to others, that his meticulous mind could find and wield justice, even within the confines of a system designed to deny it. News of Arthur's unexpected legal acumen, however, did not go unnoticed by the higher echelons of Northwood. Warden Thorne, no relation to Arthur, a common name in this region, a stern, by-the-book administrator, was a man who prized order and predictability above all else. He was a former military man, rigid in his adherence to rules and protocol, convinced that a tightly run ship was a safe ship. He heard the whispers about Hayes, the jailhouse lawyer, and received the disciplinary board's report on Marcus's case. He was, by all accounts, impressed by the unusual clarity and legal precision of Arthur's appeal. This wasn't the usual rambling, ill-informed inmate grievance. But Warden Thorne was also wary. He saw Arthur not as a budding legal mind to be encouraged, but as a potential troublemaker, someone who might disrupt the established order of the prison, a man who could read the rules too well, who could find the cracks in the system, was a threat to his carefully maintained authority. He saw a glimmer of intelligence, yes, but also a dangerous capacity for agitation. He made a mental note, a flag for potential nuisance, a quiet directive to his staff to keep a closer eye on Arthur Hayes. This warden, in his own rigid way, embodied the antagonist type B, misunderstood, arrogant entity in this isolated prison context. His arrogance wasn't about malice, but about an unshakable belief in his own infallible authority and the necessity of maintaining control, even at the cost of true justice. He would soon become another formidable, if unintended, obstacle in Arthur's unlikely quest for vindication. The small, hard-won victory for Marcus, though insignificant to the larger world, ignited a profound transformation within Arthur Hayes. The fleeting taste of justice, the quiet thrill of dissecting regulations and wielding truth, had planted a seed in the barren landscape of his despair. He returned to the law library with a renewed, almost obsessive focus, no longer seeking mere distraction but a weapon. He spent hours, then days, then weeks, poring over dusty tomes, his thin fingers tracing the labyrinthine pathways of legal precedent. Old man Rivers, observing Arthur's newfound intensity, offered a rare, approving nod. "You got the bug now, kid," he rasped. "The bug for truth." It was then, amidst the stale air and forgotten dreams of Northwood, that Arthur made a monumental decision, a silent vow to himself he would fight for his own innocence. He would appeal his conviction. This decision, whispered first to Rivers, then held tight in his own heart, was met with predictable skepticism. Most inmates, seasoned by years of bureaucratic brick walls, scoffed. "You fight, Finch, they'll bury you." Hayes. Even Rivers, practical, despite his own unwavering belief in his innocence, warned him of the futility. "The system don't like to admit it made a mistake. Son, they'd rather keep 1,000 innocent men locked up than let one go just 'cause some jailhouse lawyer found a loophole." But Arthur, for the first time in his life, felt a burning purpose, a quiet conviction that transcended fear. The shame of his wrongful conviction, the injustice of it all, fueled a stubborn determination he never knew he possessed. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom, he was fighting for the very concept of fairness, for the integrity of a system that had so cruelly failed him. The prison system, true to Rivers's warnings, seemed designed to crush any spark of hope for an appeal. Bureaucratic obstacles materialized at every turn like invisible walls. Requests for specific court transcripts from his original trial were inexplicably delayed, often lost in transit. Access to the precious law library became mysteriously restricted. The room often occupied or under maintenance during the precious few hours he could use it. Communication with the outside world, already monitored, seemed to tighten further, letters to legal aid organizations disappearing into a black hole. Arthur was largely alone in this fight. His initial public defender, Mr. Henderson, proved unresponsive. His phone calls unreturned. His letters unanswered. His family, disheartened and shamed by his conviction, had largely distanced themselves, their faith in his innocence worn down by the relentless weight of the legal process. He became a solitary figure in Northwood, a man possessed. Every waking hour not spent on mandatory prison duties was dedicated to his case. He hunched over borrowed legal pads, his hands cramped from endless writing as he meticulously drafted petitions, motions, and arguments. He spent hours cross-referencing obscure case law, his mind a steel trap for details, a talent honed by years of fixing intricate electronics. He learned legal Latin, deciphered dense statutes, and slowly, painstakingly, pieced together the threads of his defense. He was battling not just the legal system, but the sheer, crushing weight of isolation and the ever-present, insidious whispers of self-doubt that sought to erode his resolve. Was he truly capable of this? Could an undegreed inmate truly comprehend and apply complex legal principles against the might of the state? News of Arthur's self-represented appeal, a mere ripple in the vast ocean of the justice system, eventually reached the desk of District Attorney Wallace Finch. Finch, a man now basking in the afterglow of his rapid career ascent, his high conviction rates had already earned him whispers of a judicial appointment, initially found the news amusing. Hayes, the radio thief, trying to be a lawyer now. He scoffed to his junior associates, a dismissive wave of his manicured hand. Let him play. It's good for the public to see even the smallest criminals try their luck. Makes our victories sweeter. He saw it as a joke, a desperate, futile attempt by a common criminal to avoid justice. Finch instructed his team to treat it as a nuisance, a minor procedural annoyance. His chief assistant, a sharp young lawyer named Melanie Price, prepared the standard motions to dismiss, confident that Arthur, an untrained inmate with no access to proper legal resources, stood absolutely no chance. Finch's arrogance, born of years of unchallenged success and a deep-seated belief in his own infallibility, made him utterly underestimate Arthur. He viewed the law as a game for professionals, a sophisticated chess match only those with elite education and connections could play. The idea of a man like Arthur Hayes, a lumber mill worker with a high school diploma and a prison ID, posing a genuine challenge was simply unfathomable. But beneath the surface of his outward confidence, a subconscious unease began to stir in Finch. He remembered the Hayes case, a small fish, easily caught. But he also recalled the odd specificity of the stolen item, the strange, almost childlike earnestness of Arthur's denial. He dismissed it quickly, just a peculiar one. Yet, the thought lingered, a tiny, annoying gnat in the periphery of his perfectly ordered legal world. As the weeks blurred into months, Arthur raced against an impending deadline to file his formal appeal brief. The sheer volume of legal research required, the meticulous crafting of legal arguments, and the constant mental strain of prison life pushed him to the brink of exhaustion. The fluorescent lights of the law library seemed to mock him, the dry academic language of the statutes a constant challenge. He rationed his sleep, his meals often untouched as his mind wrestled with complex legal theories. His hand, aching from endless writing, sometimes cramped, forcing him to pause, clenching and unclenching his fingers. He lost weight, his face growing gaunt, his eyes hollowed, yet burning with an unquenchable fire. He was battling not just the vast, impersonal legal system, but his own self-doubt, the crushing weight of isolation, and the relentless ticking of the clock. He knew, with absolute clarity, that this was his one chance. He had to prove his intellectual capacity, to demonstrate that he could comprehend and apply complex legal principles as well as, if not better than, the highly paid attorneys arrayed against him. He wasn't just preparing a brief, he was building a case for his own intellect, his own forgotten potential, against an unyielding system determined to keep him locked away. The gauntlet had been thrown, and Arthur, the unseen man, had quietly, resolutely, picked it up. The hallowed halls of the United States Court of Appeals in Cincinnati, Ohio, hummed with a quiet, almost reverent anticipation. This was a far cry from the dusty, dismissive courtroom in Maple Creek, where Arthur Hayes's fate had been so casually sealed. The oak paneling gleamed under the soft, diffused light, and the high ceilings seemed to amplify every whisper, every rustle of paper. Arthur, dressed in an ill-fitting, slightly rumpled suit provided by a small prison charity, stood alone at the petitioner's table. He looked small against the vastness of the room, a lone figure facing the formidable legal team of District Attorney Wallace Finch, who sat at the opposing table, radiating an almost palpable aura of self-assurance. Finch, impeccably dressed, glanced at Arthur with a mixture of amusement and barely concealed disdain, confident that this proceeding would be a swift, perfunctory dismissal. The three judges on the bench, seasoned veterans of countless appeals, regarded Arthur with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, their expressions carefully neutral. Arthur began to speak, his voice, initially, a mere tremor in the grand room. He clutched a stack of meticulously handwritten notes, his fingers slightly trembling. He didn't grandstand, didn't try to play on emotions. Instead, he presented his case with a quiet, compelling command of facts that slowly, steadily, began to fill the vast space. He didn't just argue for his innocence, he dissected the original trial, brick by painstaking brick. He meticulously pointed out procedural errors, citing specific page numbers from the original transcript, highlighting how key evidence had been overlooked or miscategorized. He quoted obscure precedents he had discovered through relentless, solitary study, demonstrating how the prosecution had deviated from established legal norms. His methodical approach was akin to tracing a faulty circuit, meticulously pinpointing the exact point of failure. Then, he unveiled the new evidence that exonerated him. "Your Honors," Arthur stated, his voice gaining strength and clarity, "the primary evidence used to convict me was the brass dial itself, presented as inherently valuable. Yet, as someone with 2 decades of experience in electronics, I can state, unequivocally, that the item presented was not, in fact, an antique radio component of significant value, but rather a mass-produced replica dial from a common 1980s stereo receiver, subtly aged to appear older." He held up a detailed diagram he had meticulously drawn, showing the minute differences in tooling marks, material composition, and internal wiring diagrams that distinguished a genuine antique from the replica. He described, with startling precision, how a simple electrical resistance test, easily performed by any electronics expert, would have confirmed his assertion. His technical knowledge, honed over years of tinkering, now became his most potent legal weapon. He then provided a detailed, irrefutable timeline, corroborated by cell tower data, which his public defender had failed to subpoena, that placed him miles away. Helping a friend fix a broken water heater, at the exact time the item was reported missing from the antique shop. He hadn't just proven his innocence. He had exposed the superficiality of the original investigation and Finch's prosecution. As Arthur built his case, the confident smirk on Finch's face began to falter. A subtle ripple of unease spread through his team. Finch rose, his face flushed with indignation, determined to shut this down. Objection, Your Honors. This is utterly preposterous. The defendant is merely attempting to introduce speculative, irrelevant technical jargon to confuse the court. He is not an expert witness. He is an inmate. Your Honors, attempting to play lawyer. Finch's voice boomed, desperate to regain control of the narrative. He was attempting to ridicule Arthur's lack of formal training, to remind the court of his criminal status. For a moment, the tension in the room became unbearable. A heavy silence punctuated only by Finch's strained breathing. It seemed, for a terrifying second, that Finch's established authority and the sheer weight of his position would crush Arthur's fragile argument. The presiding judge, Justice Eleanor Vance, a stern woman known for her piercing intellect, leaned forward, her gaze unreadable. This was the Nintho moment, the precipice where everything hung in the balance. But Arthur, drawing on a newfound inner strength, a quiet resolve forged in the crucible of injustice, did not waver. He turned to the judges, his eyes steady. Your Honors, he said, his voice calm, yet firm. With all due respect to the esteemed district attorney, Rule 702 of the Federal Rules of Evidence states that a witness qualified as an expert by knowledge, skill, experience, training, or education may testify in the form of an opinion or otherwise. My experience, Your Honors, is 20 years of hands-on electronics repair, a skill that allows me to identify genuine components from fakes. This is not speculation, it is demonstrable fact. And as for my legal standing, every citizen has the right to represent themselves, and to present evidence that proves their innocence. He then quoted a specific Supreme Court case, Ferretta v. California, with astonishing accuracy, demonstrating a depth of legal understanding that stunned the court into silence. He proved, unequivocally, that he understood the procedural and evidentiary rules of law better than his original public defender, and arguably better than Finch had given him credit for. The court was no longer merely captivated, it was enthralled. Finch's confident smirk dissolved entirely, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief. Then unadulterated fury. His jaw clenched, his knuckles white against the polished table. The junior lawyers on his team exchanged nervous glances, their faces mirroring a dawning, terrible realization. Justice Vance, typically impassive, now found herself nodding almost imperceptibly, her expression morphing from skepticism to open admiration. The evidence Arthur presented, the technical specifics of the fake dial, combined with his brilliant, legally precise argument and his detailed alibi, was simply irrefutable. The flimsy foundation of his original conviction crumbled under the weight of his meticulously constructed truth. The decision came swiftly. Justice Vance cleared her throat, her voice resonating through the hushed courtroom. Having reviewed the original trial record, the submitted briefs, and heard the compelling arguments and evidence presented today by Mr. Hayes, this court finds that the original conviction suffered from significant procedural and evidentiary errors. The evidence presented by the petitioner regarding the nature of the alleged stolen item, combined with the previously unexamined alibi, casts overwhelming doubt on the verdict. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room, lingering on Arthur, then on a visibly shaken Finch. Therefore, by the unanimous decision of this panel, the conviction of Arthur Hayes for grand larceny is hereby overturned. Mr. Hayes, you are declared innocent of the charges. You are free to go. The gasp from the gallery was palpable, a collective intake of breath, followed by a wave of astonished murmurs that quickly swelled into quiet. Then respectful applause. Some reporters scribbled furiously, others stared, wide-eyed. Justice, fought for from behind prison bars, against overwhelming odds, had finally, undeniably, prevailed. It was an extraordinary vindication for the unseen man, a moment of profound catharsis not just for Arthur, but for everyone who had witnessed the quiet triumph of truth over arrogance. Finch stared, defeated, as Arthur, a quiet smile slowly spreading across his gaunt face, finally allowed himself to breathe. He had done it. He had freed himself. The massive, carved oak doors of the United States Court of Appeals in Cincinnati swung open, releasing Arthur Hayes into a world both familiar and utterly transformed. The bright afternoon sun, streaming through the arched entrance, momentarily blinded him, a stark contrast to the perpetual twilight of his cell. He took a deep breath, the crisp autumn air filling his lungs, no longer tainted by the metallic tang of institutional disinfectant. He was a free man. It was a bittersweet freedom. He had lost nearly a year of his life, suffered the profound injustice of wrongful imprisonment, and the quiet rhythm of his old life in Maple Creek was irrevocably shattered. But as he stepped onto the courthouse steps, a profound sense of strength and purpose, forged in the crucible of his ordeal, settled over him. He wasn't the same quiet, unassuming man who had walked into that lumber mill a year ago. The fallout for District Attorney Wallace Finch was swift and severe. The overturning of Arthur's conviction, particularly with the explosive revelations about the faulty evidence and Finch's dismissive handling of the case, became a national story. Major news outlets, initially skeptical, now delved into Finch's past cases, scrutinizing his high conviction rates and aggressive tactics. The verdict, widely covered, didn't just damage his professional reputation. It utterly shattered his image as an infallible prosecutor. The whispers of a judicial appointment vanished, replaced by open criticism and quiet shunning from political circles. His ambition, once his driving force, was severely curbed, and his political aspirations lay in ruins. He didn't face criminal charges for his arrogance. The law often protected such high-ranking prosecutors, but his career was irrevocably stained. A scarlet letter emblazoned on his once pristine record. The public trust he had so carefully cultivated evaporated, leaving him isolated in the very legal community he had sought to dominate. For Arthur, a cascade of new opportunities emerged. Local legal firms, impressed by his courtroom performance, offered him paralegal positions, even promising to sponsor his formal legal education. Media outlets clamored for interviews, offering book deals and lucrative appearances. But Arthur, his experience having revealed the profound injustices faced by the voiceless and the marginalized, found himself strangely unmoved by the allure of wealth or fame. His time in Northwood had redefined his calling. Instead, he dedicated himself to helping others who had been unjustly accused, who lacked the resources or the knowledge to fight the formidable legal machine. He accepted a position as a legal aid advocate with the Liberty Law Collective, a small but fiercely dedicated nonprofit based in Cincinnati that specialized in overturning wrongful convictions and assisting low-income clients. His passion for justice, honed behind bars, had solidified into a clear, unwavering purpose. He began preparing for the bar exam, poring over legal textbooks once more, intent on becoming a licensed lawyer, not for personal gain, but to amplify the voices of the silenced. One crisp Saturday morning, a few weeks after his release, Arthur made the quiet journey back to Northwood State Penitentiary. The guard at the gate recognized him, a faint flicker of surprise in his eyes, and directed him to the visitation room. He found Old Man Rivers waiting, his weathered face creased with a rare, gentle smile. Rivers had heard the news, the quiet triumph echoing even within the prison walls. "Well, well, well," Rivers rasped, his voice gravelly but warm. "Look at you, son. A free man. Never thought I'd see the day they let one of us beat 'em. Not from the inside." Arthur pulled up a chair, a stark contrast to the metal stools he was used to. "I couldn't have done it without you, Rivers," Arthur said, his voice thick with genuine gratitude. "You taught me how to read the law, how to find the cracks in their arguments. You taught me the rules." Rivers chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "The rules are just words on paper, kid. Anyone can read 'em. But you learned how to read between the lines, how to read people, how to see the truth that everyone else missed, buried under all their fancy procedures and their egos." He leaned closer, his eyes sharp. "You didn't just win your freedom, son. You showed them. You showed them what justice really means, not just what it says in the books." Arthur nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "It's a big fight, Rivers. There are so many others, just like me, stuck in there, innocent. Then you fight for 'em, kid," Rivers said, a fierce glint in his eye. "That's your new calling. You got a gift. Don't waste it on some fancy corporate law. You take that mind of yours, that eye for detail, and you keep fighting for the little guy. That's real justice." Their conversation, quiet and profound, solidified the new calm in Arthur's life. The bitterness of his incarceration had been transmuted into a powerful drive. He had found not just freedom, but a clear path forward, a sense of profound purpose that gave meaning to every moment of injustice he had endured. He carried the lessons of Northwood and the wisdom of Old Man Rivers into his new life, ready to tackle the broken mechanisms of the legal system, one meticulous case at a time. The quiet man was now a warrior for justice, armed with a lawyer's mind and a survivor's heart. 5 years later, the faint scent of sawdust from the Maple Creek lumber mill was a distant memory, replaced by the crisp, clean aroma of old leather-bound books and freshly brewed coffee that permeated Arthur Hayes's new office. The modest repair shop he had once dreamed of had indeed materialized, but not for radios. It was for broken lives and fractured justice. Arthur Hayes, now a licensed attorney, was a respected, if unconventional, figure in the legal community of Cincinnati. He hadn't pursued the lucrative paths of corporate law or personal injury. Instead, he had quietly, resolutely, built his own small, highly successful legal aid practice. He called it the Liberty Law Collective, a name chosen to reflect his unwavering belief in the fundamental right to justice, regardless of one's background. His office, located in a charming, slightly renovated brownstone, was a tangible reflection of his unique journey. Stacks of meticulously organized legal tomes lined one wall, case files piled neatly on his large, antique desk. But in one corner, almost a private altar, sat a workbench with several half-disassembled vintage radios, their intricate components gleaming under a small lamp. It was here, in quiet moments, that he still found solace, his fingers tracing familiar wires, a physical tether to the meticulous analytical mind that had set him free. He was a tireless advocate, his quiet demeanor still masking a fierce, unyielding determination. He was admired by his peers for his sharp intellect and innovative approaches, and deeply trusted by his clients, who saw in him a rare blend of empathy and unwavering resolve. Arthur's personal experience had taught him that the fight for justice was not merely about winning cases, but about systemic change and empowering others. He established a robust pro bono program within the Liberty Law Collective, specifically designed to mentor aspiring legal students from disadvantaged backgrounds. He called it the Northwood Scholars Program, a deliberate nod to the unlikely place where his own legal education began. He shared his unique, prison-honed approach to legal analysis, teaching them to scrutinize every detail, to question assumptions, and to uncover the hidden truths beneath the surface of legal documents. His students were taught to see the law not just as a set of rules, but as a dynamic, living entity that could be shaped and wielded for good. Beyond mentorship, Arthur became a vocal, yet measured advocate for prison reform and greater access to legal resources for inmates. He testified before state legislative committees, consulted with nonprofit organizations, and often spoke at legal conferences, using his own story as a powerful, undeniable testimony to the flaws within the system. Justice, he would often say, his voice calm but resonant, cannot thrive behind locked doors when truth is denied. We must ensure every voice, no matter how silenced, has the chance to be heard. He ensured that his personal injustice, his time in Northwood, was not merely a tragic memory, but a powerful catalyst for systemic change. One bright spring afternoon, after a particularly grueling day at court where he had successfully overturned another wrongful conviction, Arthur took a leisurely walk through his neighborhood. The air was fresh, scented with blooming lilacs, a vibrant contrast to the stale air of past years. As he strolled, he passed a small street vendor selling an eclectic array of second-hand goods. His gaze, still instinctively drawn to the discarded and overlooked, fell upon a battered, vintage radio, its wooden casing scratched, its components visible through a cracked screen. It was a model not unlike the one that had inadvertently led to his incarceration. He paused, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. He picked it up, feeling the familiar weight of it in his hands. Turning it over, his thumb tracing the faint outline of a missing brass dial. It was a powerful, full-circle moment. The old radio, once a symbol of his obscure hobby and the minor crime that had plunged him into the depths of the justice system, now represented the enduring power of self-discovery and the profound justice found in the most unexpected of places. He had once fixed broken things, wires, circuits, and faulty components. Now, his meticulous mind, honed by adversity, was dedicated to fixing broken lives and, piece by painstaking piece, a broken system. He placed the radio back down, a quiet sense of contentment washing over him. The sun shone warmly on his face, illuminating the path ahead, a path of purpose, integrity, and unending advocacy. He walked on, the sounds of the city, vibrant and alive, a testament to the freedom he had won, and the liberty he now fought to secure for others. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.